Hello, good morning, and welcome to the session on International Peace Day. I'd like to first and foremost wish you all Happy International Peace Day. I am the moderator for this morning. My name is Dr. Ugoji Adanma Eze. I'd like to briefly introduce the panelists here. We have on my extreme right, Liziane Imakor, USA Director, Hallmark International Youth Club, Shushmita Shekhar, Urban Design and Strategic Consultant Delegate to United Nations ECOSOC, Board Member, Asia Initiative, and Steve Chu, Buddhist Turkey Foundation Representative to the United Nations. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, Resolution 2050 is indeed historic because it finally puts youth at the center of the processes and policies for the sustainable development of peace and security. It is indeed a unique and unprecedented resolution for different reasons. To start with, it was the first time that the United Nations Security Council adopted a thematic resolution dealing comprehensively with youth in issues related to peace and indeed security. I'd like to first and foremost give, and the other points of it is that it has 5 or 6 thematic themes. Firstly, participation, protection, prevention, partnership, and reintegration. If I may hand across firstly to Shushmita Shekhar, if you could say a few words about yourself. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I am Sushmita Shekhar. I'm an architect, urban designer. I work on social and environmental impact projects globally across 5+ countries across the world. And I think it's great to be here because this is such a pivotal moment in attaining our sustainable development goals. We have only 2,258 days left from 21st of September to the 31st of December 2030. So I think it's critical to be action oriented and to really move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm with a Buddhist humanitarian aid organization called SDGs. Roughly that translates to Compassionate Relief. We work in 128 countries with country offices in 66 and really centered around how we alleviate the sufferings of those in need. I want to wish everyone a happy International Day of Peace.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Liziana.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Liziana Imakoa. I'm from Cameroon, and I'm the USA Country Director for a youth-led organization called Hallmark International Youth Club. I'm also a youth advocate for the UNMGCY, as well as a monitoring and evaluation analyst and a gender specialist. I think this is a very crucial day celebrating the Peace International Day, and especially that we're all here in the margins of the 78th General Assembly, and we're actually reviewing the progress of the 2030 agenda, to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And then I think young people are key agents, to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also in peace processes and in peace agreement. So I think it's a great thing that the organizers actually put this together, and we have a lot of young people here, to be part of the conversation and seeing how the role of young people, how we can enhance and amplify the role of young people in peace processes. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're all aware that terrorism is a dynamic, mutable phenomenon. It transforms, shapes, adapts, and sheds off guises, adapts itself to constant challenges of the day, and above all, to local and global trends, to rise and fall of ideologies, technological developments, and particularly interests of regimes, states, and superpowers. We're aware that in the African continent, terrorism does play a significant role, and also on the international scene. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 21st century, we are indeed at the clutch of another leap in the local and global terrorism, and it is a tangible threat to international peace and security. If I may pose the first question to Shushmita. Shushmita, being very aware of the fact that making cities resilient is very important, especially as regards peace. How can cities help in the process of peace building, more particularly for young people?
Thank you so
Over
much
to
for
you.
that question. So when we see around the world, we see this profound challenges that cities face today, from the pandemic, climate change, digital divide. And these are really eroding civic, not only peace, but also like the democracy and civic spaces that we see, the declining trust among even communities that we see. Um, so I want to share a little bit about how cities and public spaces and social infrastructure can help in assist peace building. But before that, I want to take a moment to actually thank each one of you here and every youth on who are protesting in the streets, who are on social media, really activating or really advocating for peace and asking for it, because youth are the center and source of innovation, ideas, and solutions. So we need more younger people coming to the table, coming to more decision making tables. Often we come to advocacy places or panels, but we need youth to be in decision making tables, and we need them to be taking the future urban decisions, because they are the ones who are going to be the future urban decision makers. So again, I want to really focus on how social urbanism really helps in peace building. So what is social urbanism? So social urbanism is a concept of investing in people, places, and jobs, and really designing the best of social infrastructure and public spaces so that we can foster better collaboration among communities, we can build better peace among people. So what are some of the strategies that can help in social urbanism? One is to make the places accessible. Most of the time, even living in New York City, we have public spaces, but most of the time these don't feel accessible to people of all communities, of all ages. So how do we really make these public spaces accessible and create a sense of belonging to the community? Um, so looking at parks, public spaces, community centers, how can these provide spaces for people to really come together, serve as venues for peaceful protests, and really bring people together? Because often we see that public spaces are not democratic enough, to bring people together to even voice their opinion. So we need to first democratize our public spaces. Second, I want to talk about social infrastructure. Of course, a lot of our governments really focus on waste, energy, all of these infrastructures, and we really need this for cities. But the most important thing is social infrastructure: our libraries, our schools, our digital centers. So really focusing on these infrastructure that improves quality of life. And this can really contribute to peace building, because often conflicts happen because we lack these resources and we're really striving to attain these resources. So really strengthening our cities with social infrastructure can be a step towards peace building. The third, I want to talk about partnerships and negotiations, right? We cannot recognize all of this alone. So we need governments, NGOs, youth-led organizations, and international institutions to really help amplify impact. So networking events like this, or sharing best practices even online on digital media, LinkedIn, like whatever media we all use, sharing best practices and learning across disciplines, I think is kind of crucial to helping better cities and also better global collaboration and peace building. And last, I want to recognize youth in decision making. Young people need to be involved in policy making, in decisions, in government tables, so that we can empower them to be the next generation of urban decision makers. Provide them with the tools, knowledge, history, background, and really bring them to the table so that they are able to voice their opinion, also provide response. Yes, I would like to end by saying that, it's an urgency. We all need to act. Like I said, we have 2,258 days left to December 21, 2030. So let's act together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve, if I may pose a question to you based on the said United Nations, thank you, Security Council resolution. How far would you agree with me, concur with me that promoting young people's participation is indeed a prerequisite for successful peace building? And secondly, how far would you say or concur with me and agree the value and indeed the imperative of building upon young people's diversity and indeed experiences?
I love these questions. Thanks so much.
The floor
And
is yours.
thank you for these. Thank you for these reflections so far. I think Security Council Resolution 2250 is an imperative must in order to ensure we have successful peace building. If we think about like what it means to cultivate peace, it's the bringing together of different silos. It's the bringing together of different opinions and insights. And so one of the main ways that SDG works to build peace is through humanitarian aid, assistance, and development. And so we constantly find ourselves in moments where communities are at their most dire crisis and need, right? And we're coming to them in this moment and we're seeing that people are slipping through the cracks. They're falling behind, right? And when we think about what it means for people to fall behind and slip through the cracks, it means that they are left behind by this society. They become disillusioned to this idea that this society cares for them. And it leads to this increasing trend towards radicalization, towards terrorism, and towards extremism. And so how do we ensure that we actually can heal these wounds, this trauma, and ensure that they don't slip through the cracks? They need to be at the table, right? But I think one of the dangers we find with the Security Council resolution is this work an idea or is it being implemented? Is it performative or is it transformational? Right, and what we can say within the UN and how it's striving to change its existing systems to accommodate youth voices isn't just that we need youth to be on panels and in spaces where high-level leaders are present, but we need to consistently strive to advocate that in the creation of policies, in the crafting and drafting of language and text, that we have those representatives, whether they're coming from youth councils to give inputs, or they're coming from a more one-on-one, bilateral way to help shape these conversations. And so we're seeing progress on that front, and I think it's a prerequisite because only by ensuring that youth are present can we allow for that piece to be sustained, right? All hands on deck. And I think similarly, building on the diversity and experiences of youth, there's a key point that I think the United Nations does well in how it convenes, and it convenes intergenerationally, right? Like, it's not to say that successful peace building is something that youth call for and youth alone have the solutions. There's so much historical trauma, there's so much that needs to be unpacked. That knowledge youth cannot have alone, right? There's so many nuances to the wisdom that our elders hold that we need to lean in on so we know how to navigate these complex, opaque systems, right? We require the mentorship in order to be able to say, how do you come into an international space and really be effective, as opposed to simply coming in, taking your photos, saying you were here, and then leaving to go back, right? And all of this, in order to build this diversity and experience, requires investment. Right? It requires straight up financial investment in youth, and then also the investment in training to give them the mentorship and experience so that they can truly create the impact that we want to see.
Could I also put something to you, listen to what you're saying? What about, you're talking about youth, what about data?
Yeah.
Research. As you say, it's okay to be here and
Yes.
to be chatting. Resolution 2250. What does it mean to somebody in a remote village in Africa?
Yeah.
In a remote village in India, in a remote village in Pakistan? How were you able to get these resolutions out there?
So I think it's twofold, right? And like one piece of like disseminating the message of peace is the purpose of a lot of civil society organizations, right? We walk into communities that are untouched by others simply because they don't have the capacity to do so, right? Whether it's
Well, let me ask you another question. Are we being successful as a society?
So I think
are we getting the message out there?
We're not there yet. And I think we can also see that not even with the Security Council's resolution on 2250, but even the Sustainable Development Goals themselves.
Yes.
Right? We're what?
And 12%? Also Africa Agenda 2063.
Yeah. And all of this, I think, is emblematic to the fact that our reach is not yet where it needs to be. Right? Despite us being globalized, despite the internet being so prevalent, the ways in which we're communicating about these ideas aren't sticking. right? If we really communicated effectively about Security Council Resolution 2250, youth would be truly empowered to know that on a global level, there is this standard, this desire that at a local level, that councils, communities are bringing in youth, right? But we're staring down decades of patriarchal and ageist ideas within communities that believe that only elders have the wisdom. And this is happening in rural communities where perhaps we don't have that reach, we aren't touching yet. And so it's up to organizations that partner and collaborate with the United Nations to really reach out to the most rural areas and find culturally appropriate ways to educate, inspire, and empower.
And also, there's also an imperative, a need towards closing the gap in science, technology,
Yes.
and innovation in developing countries. Thank you very much. If I may turn across now to Lisiana, and also if you could expand on what are the best practices and above all, the diverse challenges for youth participation. The floor is yours.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I think we definitely first need to start. I mean, given that we're here in the margins of the General Assembly, and a lot of our heads of states are here, we need to find ways to actually urge member states, to consider ways to increase the inclusive representation of young people in decision-making processes at the local, national, regional, and international level, and even through working groups, and also even as well as relevant actors or key stakeholders, that are to actually, take young people into action, when they're actually going into these negotiations and implementation processes, for our peace agreements. We also need to involve young people in, resettlement, rehabilitation, and reintegration, for peace processes. And you mentioned something that was very important, like in the inclusion of marginalized young people. We need to include local youth, marginalized young people, youth, indigenous youth, youth with disability, and in this process, and also ensure that it's gender sensitive, and this processes are in the initiatives that we actually take is gender sensitive, gender responsive. And what do I actually mean by that? And a lot of them, their voices are not being heard. They're living in rural areas, so ensuring that even this processes, are being undertaken in your local languages. There's access to internet, even for the protection of women and girls and youth, and which protection is actually one of is part of the 5 segments of the UN STR 2250. So that's also very important. We also need for young people, to advocate and for accountability and transparency of our governments and of our heads of states. I'm actually speaking for the African continent. There has been this trend of our leaders, not everyone, but a lot of our leaders. There's poor rule of law, poor lack of good governance and zero accountability and transparency. A lot of our leaders are here, and yes, they're sitting, we're doing a lot of declarations, but is there actually, there needs to be accountability at the local, at the national level. So giving them the responsibility to actually take whatever they do and actually implement that in their respective countries.
Sorry, so would you basically say that there's a need for ownership,
Exactly.
leadership, accountability,
transparency. And also, we can also foster intercultural and interreligious dialogue, to encourage the tolerance and to also break down, stereotypes that often, for conflict. And you also you asked me about the different challenges that young people, to actually different challenges to young people in terms of the young people's participation in peace process. I would actually say the first one is young people. Again, I'm speaking for the continent, the African continent, on behalf of the youths, the African youths, and also youths in the global south in general. Youths have limited access to education, and we need education is important to empower young people. So governments and key stakeholders actually have to come together and work together to ensure that there's quality education for our youths. And so also one other issue that we're facing is the rise in unemployment, youth unemployment, right? And which actually leads to frustration amongst young people. It leads to civil unrest, social unrest. It's actually one of the main reasons why we see a lot of young people, join insurgent groups, or join terrorist groups, terrorist activities, because there's no jobs. So governments, we need to encourage entrepreneurships, vocational trainings, for our young people, and to actually create, avenues for economic growth, for them, and this also applies to young people in the global south overall. And I also wanted to say something, just relating back to the first question. I know this sounds like it's a little bit like out of the box, but I don't know if have we ever thought about creating our own like political parties for young people? Because if they're not giving us room, so why not, create our own thing? If they're not going to give you room at like a voice at the table, so how about, trying to foster that and push that type of agenda? But I would say, and last but not least, funding. A lot of young people are here. We always come to youth-led events, or to actually advocate for or high-level meetings to advocate for youth rights, or the engagement, or the full participation, the inclusive participation of young people. But one of the huge challenges is financing. A lot of young people would love to be here, but they're not here today. But we're here. We're privileged to be here. Some young people are challenged, or facing different barriers, like they don't have access to visas. I'm actually, as part of the being a youth advocate for the major group of children and youths at the UN. There's a lot of young people that were supposed to be here, but they did not get a visa. And just because you have a invitation from the UN does not guarantee you access to coming here. And some of them have that visa, but New York is expensive. So how about we create, and the funding is limited. Even when the UN allocates funding for young people, whether it's full or partial funding, it's very limited funding. I don't even think there's certain things I cannot really disclose, but it's very limited funding. So if we can actually, create more room for financing young people to be at the table, to participate at processes, or even, fund some of our projects, I think, it would definitely be awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Are we allowed to have one or two questions for the audience to the panelists? Would anybody like to ask a question? I believe the lady at the back.
I would like to give this opportunity to all participants here.
Oh, would anybody like to ask a question to one of the speakers?
Can I ask a question?
Oh, hello, yes.
Yeah, if I want to start something like this in Nigeria, how am I going to start?
Which of the speakers, or do you want to put it to?
I think
I can start, and maybe we can jump in.
we didn't get the
Yeah,
question.
my name is Teddy.
Oh, sorry.
Director of Technical Care. I'm partner to United Nations Economic Commission Affairs. So I wanted to do something like this in Nigeria. So
Yeah.
how am I going to go about it to support the youth?
For sure. So thinking about like what it means to start this sort of dialogue on peace with youth in Nigeria, right? So I think Major Group for Children and Youth is a great place to connect, and thinking about like where are the existing nodes and networks and hubs of youth that are already gathering, right? And then the next piece becomes like, what are the platforms and ways in which we're allowing these youth to meaningfully engage, right? Because conversation for conversation alone will only get you so far in terms of interest in bringing in high-level youth or people who are engaging already in this space, who you want their expertise from, right? But what are the outcomes from these dialogues? Is it capacity building alone, or are we able to then take whatever comes out of these dialogues and conversations and transform them into policy briefs, recommendations to local policymakers, what have you, right? I think the closer you get to creating change through dialogue, the more interest you'll see within youth around the world. I think similarly also, it's important to understand this work not through the lens of an individual organization, but through the lens of a international community, right? Like one thing I think we didn't get to talk about that is driving radicalization right now within young people is the epidemic of loneliness, right? And through this lens, we're seeing in like modern society and how modernity like frames success and like well-being, that we see it very centered on the individual, right? And so the burden of creating action lies at the heart of the individual, right? But in coming to be in with community and asking this question, even asking this question alone, creates that spark within the people around you that say, maybe I have some representatives in Nigeria that would be interesting to connect you to, right? And then by building out this community, we are able to create this like intermeshed web that not only makes us more resilient to the negative impacts that drive like extremism and what have you, but also give us more resources so that maybe we ourselves can't make it happen, but through these different networks, we can really create the change we need.
I'm happy to go and also answer your question. So I'm also a country director for Hallmark International Youth Club. So we're a youth-led organization. So we empower young people and we build the capacity of young people through a lot of dialogues similar to this. So I would say one key thing is partnerships. Given the fact that we're here, I think collaborations with there's a lot of, in this room, you're going to find a lot of young leaders, directors of, like youth organizations, CSOs from India, respective countries, even in Africa as well, and doing similar projects. So I think even being able to to collaborate with other young people that are already working on existing projects. I'm also happy to network with you. We've been doing a lot of similar stuff like this online and in person. So seeing how you want to create a similar dialogue, and even seeing how I can connect you with young people and CSOs in Nigeria that are happy to work with you on this type of initiative. Yeah.
I have like 34 partnerships people that people have work with me. Let me carry it out of that.
I think it's great you brought up at this point because I think localization is critical. One of the programs that we have been working on in India is actually to bring these voices to larger tables, like holding consultations before UN conferences, right? Because often many people can't be represented, inside the UN because of the bureaucracy and a lot of other things. But can we hold like pre-meetings, consultations with local organizations, with youth, identify their voices, maybe even create videos so we can kind of amplify their voices and then bring them to larger tables and create that space for them. So
Thank you. I believe the gentleman there in the nice orange tie.
Thank you. Do I need to stand up?
Okay.
Yes.
Could you tell us who you are first?
Yes, my name is Franklin Wisi. I'm from Africa CDC Youth Advisory Team for Health. I'm here with my colleagues, my bosses, and Dr. Kaneki behind. I want to use this opportunity to thank the organizers of this initiative. And to my sister from Cameroon, I'm from Cameroon. There is what we talk about, addressing social determinants of radicalization. What do I mean? You mentioned something that when they come to peace and the youth want to take up positions and all the like how many of them are registered to vote? There is this tendency that we want to talk, we want to, but if you don't vote, how are you going to change that decision? So I think that there needs to be more awareness creation in the sense that you have to understand that for them to actually take that power, you need to have that, awareness that this is what they need to do. They need to follow the process, the law process. So social determinants that will lead to radicalization. From the African perspective, we have poverty, unemployment, other factors, limited access to education that will spoil up these people to, just start being extreme in whatever dimension. So this is more of a comment, but if you have an idea to add to this, I'll be happy to learn because all of this goes back to influence healthcare and it's an issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we'll run out of time, so if I could just say a few words. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for attending this and wish you all happy International Peace Day. Whilst on the one hand, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250 is inspiring, let us face the realities of it, especially in this day and age in the 21st century. It is important to realize that security and development are interrelated, and there's a need to create educational and economic opportunities for the young people so that they'll be part of the broader agenda. We must also pay particular attention to the eminent risks related to radicalization. While specific anti-radicalization actions, in particular through education, can have positive effects, they need to be accompanied by development support addressing the root causes of radicalization. There's a need to build resilience in communities and promoting the values of tolerance, understanding, and dialogue within different religions. There's a need to open up opportunities for economic and social advancement and providing access to education with solid curriculum to work with. There's a need to engage the youth, particularly the youth in Africa, through decent jobs. Youth unemployment can be a decisive vulnerability. There's a need to providing jobs and investment, particularly emphasis should be on agriculture, food security, and human resources through peace building. As an international lawyer, I have to put this through. There's a need to strengthen governance through democracy, the rule of law, and security sector institutions. Above all, as regards radicalization, may I put forward the 3Ds, that is deterrence, through educating the youth globally on the dangers of terrorism and insecurity. Development means providing economic opportunity through jobs and social integration. And above all, one cannot underestimate the importance of dialogue. If we talk together, it goes a long way. With those who are willing and amenable to renounce violence and cut off links with terrorist organizations. There's a need to build bridges of peace. Finally, I'd like to say to everybody to think, a food for thought today, what does peace mean to you? Thank you very much.